Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we're taking the tanks out for a day. The British 7th Armoured Brigade is hooking around the southern flank of Damascus and, having already cut Route 110 and Highway 30, is now making a final lunge to cut Route 5 as well and prevent Syrian army units escaping the capital. These are primarily elements of the 8th Syrian Armoured Division, which has already been badly mauled by coalition forces, but now we're getting into the area held by the 9th Armoured Division. This is more intact, having been held in reserve south of Damascus to deter Israeli intervention. According to the briefing, the 9th Armoured Division remains a formidable, cohesive fighting force, but we haven't actually made contact with it yet. The briefing is actually quite interesting. They're not the easiest things to write, and this one doesn't actually outline a specific task. We have some victory conditions and combat mission objectives. There are 1,350 points on offer for destroying enemy forces and 2 touch objectives, A and B, worth 100 and 300 victory points respectively. But I feel like I have a lot of leeway to interpret the mission here. There's no solid tasking laid out in black and white. Looking at the terrain, we have a pretty chunky 2x1.5 kilometer map dominated by open agricultural land. Route 5 runs north-south down the centre on a slight embankment, and there are some secondary roads and farm complexes scattered about. In particular, there is a string of compounds down my left map edge that includes some multi-storey buildings, and there are some slopes in the fields close to my friendly map edge. One in the lentil field and one more centrally behind the olive grove. Aside from them, the map is almost flat. There's some gentle undulation, but nothing that's a significant block to line of sight, particularly to the line of sight of vehicles. Objective A, the lesser touch objective, is to the left centre of my half of the map. The greater touch objective, Objective B, is towards the far side of the map, just right of centre. The enemy is supposedly elements of 2 different armoured divisions, so I am expecting to go up against tanks. It makes sense for the enemy to deploy these on the other side of Route 5, where they can take advantage of the slight reverse slope behind the highway embankment. If there is any enemy armour deployed forward, the map is so open I'm very likely to run into them almost immediately. To get the job done, I have a compact but powerful force. 6 Challenger 2s, 3 Scimitar recce tanks and some infantry elements, an armoured infantry platoon and a Javelin section, all in warriors, backed up by some HQ elements, an FO team and a tactical air controller. These are arriving in chunks of a few vehicles and 1 or 2 tanks at a time over the first 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to wait to have my whole force at my disposal. In support, I'm starting off with the company medium mortars, with a section of 155mm howitzers and a pair of Harrier GR9s coming online between the 10 and 15 minute marks. So with the terrain and forces in mind, let's go back to the mission. Given the overall situation, I think the intent here is to deny Route 5 to the enemy in order to stop them fleeing Damascus and reconstituting in the south. I don't need to be literally sitting on Route 5 to do that. It's a mostly open map with long sight lines, and I have a small force with lots of long-range firepower. So what I want to do is take up elevated positions and fight a long-range standoff fight with the Challengers, Javelins and off-map support. The tanks can fight from the hills at my end of the map, the Javelins and observers can fight from the buildings on my left, and I can screen them with my infantry. Nice and simple. By remaining at a distance, I'm also preserving my options to push up as the situation dictates. That means immediately sending most of my starting force off to the left. I want the Javelins up in the closest 3-storey building, where I think they're going to have the best view, and they're going to need some support on the off chance that the compounds are occupied. There are some enemy 120mm mortars dropping in right off the bat. They're too far away to really worry about, and as a bonus I assume the enemy wouldn't drop them on or behind their own position, so it's a good indicator that the Syrians are on the other side of those fire missions. Eyeballing the compounds on the left, one of the Scimitars makes the first spot, an enemy tank. It's almost 1800 meters out and partially hull down, which demonstrates the kind of sight lines we're going to be dealing with here. On close examination, it's got a noticeably forward of centre turret, making it a T-62. The obvious explosive reactive armour package, and the slightly less obvious laser rangefinder mounted on top of the gun mantlet mean it's probably one of the modernised versions. Not a tank the Scimitar can really expect to go up against with its 30mm Radin cannon, but certainly something the Challengers should be able to deal with. The T-62 is side on, and the Scimitar has spotted it through the smoke and dust of one of the mortar barrages, so it looks like the Syrian tank hasn't noticed anything yet. The TAC AI for the Scimitar pops smoke anyway to be on the safe side. That at least lets me roll the nearest Challenger 2, B Squadron HQ, up into position with the hope of a cheeky through smoke engagement, courtesy of its thermal observation and gunnery sight. The Scimitar, meanwhile, starts blasting away at the wall into what I intend to be the Javelin compound. The 30mm cannon is not the best weapon for this, and the Radin has a low rate of fire to boot, so it's going to be some time before there's a gap big enough for the missile teams to slip through. It's still poking holes when my other Challenger, the B Squadron 2IC on the slope behind the olive grove, spots another T-62. This might be the same one. If it is, it's moved up a bit into the sugar beet field on the left flank. The 2IC quickly scores a hit, but it looks a fraction too high and skims off the top of the turret without penetrating. That's a bit of a surprise, but clearly more of a shock for the crew who pop smoke and start to reverse. Two more tanks appear on either side, amounting to a platoon in line. B Squadron HQ nails the right-hand T-62 in the turret, and a second later the 2IC gives the left-hand one the same treatment. Both are knocked out, brewing up in the field. The original T-62 hasn't gotten away with it. B Squadron HQ regains the spot, and although it misses high with its first shot, it doesn't miss with its second. One T-62 platoon in the bag. As the name implies, the T-62 is an older model Soviet tank. While it's still a threat, it needs a lot of advantages to go up against modern NATO tanks with a good chance of survival. In the same turn, the B Squadron HQ tank takes a hit to the gun mantlet. This didn't penetrate, didn't even degrade any subsystems, but whatever fired it remains unspotted. Clearly there are other contacts out there that can see and are engaging B Squadron HQ. I can't see them though. The HQ tank should have the best chance to make a spot, but isn't picking anything up, and the 2IC tank and the Scimitar on Olive Grove Hill aren't seeing anything either. I really need those Javelins up on the high ground. They don't even need to target anything, I just need a good set of eyes up there. Luckily, the Scimitar has finally opened up the compound, and after poking the Scimitar's nose in to see if it gets shot at, which it doesn't, I bring the Javelin section up in their Warrior. They're piling out as B Squadron HQ takes more hits. Leaving the tank there to get pummeled wasn't exactly my intention. I was expecting the crew to either spot and engage whatever was bouncing shells off them, or for them to pop smoke and reverse off. Their TAC AI instead decided to do neither, and sat there under fire until they take a partial penetration to the front hull. The crew inside are okay, but the engine is gone. The Challenger is immobilised. Popping smoke, they finally spot something. Another Syrian tank on the far side of the map. This time it's the optics on top that give its identity away. That's the doghouse for a thermal imager. Combine that with the low slung profile and older style brick block era, and you've got a T-72 AV Terms T, the second most capable tank the Syrians have in shock force after the T-90. B Squadron HQ puts a fin round straight through the turret, detonating the ammunition and blowing it up. There are more though. The HQ tank spots another moving right to left on the other side of Route 5 and knocks it out before its number comes up. A 125mm shell pierces the front hull. The Challenger is a write-off, but the entire crew survive and bail out. I'm setting up my HQ elements in the building just across from the wreck, so B Squadron HQ run off to join them. Losing one of my 6 Challengers is a major blow, especially as we're only 7 minutes in and only 2 more have arrived so far, and the fact that there are T-72 Terms Ts out there as well as T-62s ratchets up the threat significantly. It's not going to change my plan though. If anything, it goes a long way towards confirming my intent to fight a standoff battle. And there's not much better for a standoff fight at this scale than Javelin. The Javelin section has 2 launchers, with a few extra missiles stashed in their Warrior, and from their newfound position on the roof and 3rd floor of Javelin House, they have a good view across the map. The spots start coming in. One T-72 on the left, probably the one that took out B Squadron HQ, another rolling in from the far right corner, and then some BMP-2s advancing up the centre. Time to go to work then. The Javelin team on the roof nails the leftmost T-72, then the one on the right, and while it's busy, 2 more T-72s appear in the centre near Objective B. I brought 2 of the Challengers into reverse slope positions behind Lentil Field Hill while this was going on, and now it's time to roll them up and get in on the party. They knock out one of the central T-72s, the Javelin knocks out the other, and then suddenly the BMPs have gotten across Route 5, where they fall prey to another Javelin and a Hesh round from one of the Challengers. To round out the engagement, the rooftop Javelin spots a command BMP in the distance and adds that to the tally as well. Suddenly, 5 minutes after the Javelins are in position, the enemy armour threat seems like less of a problem. So my attention switches over to my infantry screen. It's unlikely, but not impossible, that something may have already made it over Route 5 and into the buildings at the end of Compound Row, and there are certainly some enemy stragglers heading that way from the wrecked BMPs. So off goes the Scimitar and my infantry platoon to set up a screen. They'll have plenty of open killing ground around them, and they're shielded from enemy direct fire across the map by the Route 5 embankment. Having punched down to the end, while the Challengers pick off another T-72 contact, the Scimitar is hosing down the nearest enemy infantry with its coax when it's suddenly hit by an ATGM. The Scimitar is nowhere near as heavily armoured as the Challengers. The driver and gunner are both killed while the commander scrambles out. My first casualties. It could have been a lot worse though. I have one of the infantry-laden warriors right behind the Scimitar, I've no idea why, and if that had been hit, I would have been having a much worse day. It's not clear where the missile came from, and I'm not particularly in a rush to attract another one to find out. I kick out my sections and occupy the nearby buildings before starting to call in my mortars on the enemy infantry stragglers up ahead. With that security set up and the imminent tank threat dealt with, I can settle into the routine of watch and shoot. The Javelins can make out some enemy soldiers milling around on the far side of the map, but I'm not getting any more contacts. There are still 45 minutes left on the clock, so I'm expecting there to be more enemy reinforcements on the way, or something on the other side of the map that I'm not seeing. That sounds like a job for my air support, so I start calling the Harriers in onto the area around Objective B. In the meantime, not a lot happens, until the Javelin team spots a T-72 moving left to right along the back of the map. I've got the Javelins on short target arcs. I want them to hold on to their last missile, and I'm confident that the Challengers, still hull down on top of Lentil Field Hill, will be able to spot it. They don't. Worse, the T-72 gets a very cheeky shot off on the move, and the long range means that the round's trajectory carries it over the reverse slope and down onto the hill of one of the Challengers. Coming in at such an angle, hitting part of the tank the T-72 can't actually see, it knocks the Challenger out. Again, no casualties, and it's my fault for leaving the tanks exposed in order to try and maximise my spotting instead of pulling them back to safer turret down positions. It's some consolation at least that the offending T-72 drives straight into the engagement area of the Harriers, where it is violently disassembled by a Maverick. The Harriers don't contribute anymore though. They may have tried to engage some other targets because they've lost the 500-pound bombs they were carrying, but I didn't notice any 500-pound bomb detonations on the map, and they're not exactly something that you miss. So my impression is that the central area is pretty clear. In fact, my impression is that, aside from some scattered infantry and at least one as yet unseen ATGM team, there's not much opposition out there at all. The Harriers seem to agree, as one expends a $100,000 missile on an abandoned pickup truck. The only excitement in the next few turns is an enemy mortar barrage apparently aimed at the B Squadron HQ wreck. This is almost entirely ineffective, aside from 2 rounds that fall way off target and kill 3 of the 4 bailed out crewmen from the other knockdown Challenger. Some needless casualties I could have avoided by simply moving them away from the firing line. With so little apparent opposition and Route 5 effectively controlled by fire, I have a choice between staying put and advancing to try and mop up enemy forces on the other side of the highway. The second option is not something I'm particularly keen on, not least because I have a single platoon of infantry with which to try and clear all those buildings. I quickly dip into the editor to check if there are any more enemy reinforcements scheduled, and finding that everything that's set to arrive must be here, hit the ceasefire button. It's a tactical victory for the Brits, with 964 victory points to the Syrians' 431. and 150 of those Syrian points are an automatic bonus they get to level the playing field. I've lost 5 men, 2 challengers and a single scimitar. The enemy has lost 50 men, 3 T-62 MVs, 8 T-72 AV Terms Ts, and 3 BMP-2s, so plenty of damage done, but there is still a relatively significant Syrian force on the field. Not least, there are still 2 T-72s set up near Objective B that the Harriers evidently failed to spot or engage. There are also some heavy weapons, including ATGM teams, and a big mass of infantry crammed into the workers' housing. That's certainly enough to make me feel justified about not pushing my luck with such a small force, or that open terrain that's been working for me through this battle would suddenly be on the other side. Playing out the time limit might result in me getting a few more spots and allow me to smash Syrian concentrations with my as yet unused artillery, but I'm not sure that will be a lot of fun. I also think that I've achieved the mission I've been set. The Syrians have lost the significant part of their combat power, and they're in no condition to contest control of Route 5. I don't need to take the risk of punching across the map. My force can wait for at least the rest of the squadron to arrive before moving on. And in the meantime, nothing's coming down that highway. So, bit of a weird mission in a few respects, but an interesting anti-armour exercise. Hope you all enjoyed this one. You can watch all these videos early on Patreon and via YouTube memberships if you'd like to support the channel. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.